The Halloween Night of Elder Creek. Chapter 1. The Return to Elder Creek. The October wind carried the smell of rot and wet leaves down the main road of Elder Creek. The kind of cold that didn't just bite at your skin, it crawled into your bones and stayed there. For the first time in 20 years, the town was alive again. Orange lights blinked along porches, paper ghosts fluttered from branches, and for the first time in 2 decades, the words trick or treat were being whispered in Elder Creek. No one could quite remember who decided to bring Halloween back. Maybe it was the mayor, eager to revive a dying town. Maybe it was the new families who'd moved in and didn't know the stories. Or maybe Elder Creek itself had grown lonely. No one said the quiet part aloud. The reason Halloween had been banned. The children who never came home. The pumpkins that had turned black by morning. The way the fog never left after that night. Elder Creek sat in a narrow valley surrounded by pine forest so thick it could swallow you whole. The houses leaned into the hillsides, old wood and stone darkened by rain and time. Most of the residents were the same as they'd been 20 years ago, pale, quiet, and cautious. They smiled at the decorations, but the smiles never reached their eyes. Every carved pumpkin, every flickering candle felt like a risk, like a dare. On the edge of town, beside the long-abandoned cornfield, the old Holloway farmhouse stood in silence. Its windows were dark, but the porch was lined with pumpkins, not carved, not lit, just sitting there. No one had placed them. No one had seen them arrive. By sunset, the children began their rounds. Sammy Brooks, 10 years old, dressed as a skeleton with glow-in-the-dark bones, ran ahead of his friends, his candy bucket bouncing against his knee. His mother called after him to stay close, but her voice was swallowed by laughter and crunching leaves. The streets glowed orange beneath the streetlights. The air smelled of smoke and sugar. The whole town seemed to breathe again. For a few hours, everything felt almost normal. Just before 9, a thick fog rolled down from the forest. It wasn't the usual mist of the valley. It was heavy, slow, and cold, like something alive. It curled between the houses and coiled around the children's ankles. One by one, porch lights flickered out. At the end of Pine Hollow Road, Mrs. Lambert stepped outside to blow out her jack-o'-lanterns. She froze when she noticed the last one, sitting at the edge of her porch. She didn't carve that one, and it was smiling. A wide, jagged grin stretched from corner to corner. The eyes were too deep, too narrow, carved with precision no child could manage. The candle inside was already burning, and when Mrs. Lambert leaned closer, the flame bent toward her, as if it was breathing her in. Somewhere down the street a scream echoed, short, sharp, and unmistakably a child's. The kind of scream that stops your heart mid-beat. Then silence. The fog swallowed the sound as if it had never happened. The wind carried a whisper, faint but clear enough to freeze the blood in her veins. Trick or treat. That night, 5 children went missing in Elder Creek. The search lasted until dawn. Flashlights swept through the cornfields. Dogs barked at shadows, and parents called names that never came back. By sunrise, the fog had vanished, but in its place, at the edge of the field, stood 5 pumpkins, each one perfectly carved, each one wearing the exact same smile as the children who were gone. Chapter 2. Pumpkins of the Past. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The sky over Elder Creek was a dull, bruised gray, the kind of light that never warms anything, the kind that makes shadows look deeper. Sheriff Alan Harlow stood at the edge of the cornfield, his boots sinking into the wet earth. His breath rose in pale clouds as he stared at the 5 pumpkins lined neatly before him. Each one was perfectly round, their skins smooth and pale like bone beneath the dirt. And each one had a face. Not the kind of faces carved by children. These were too human. The eyes were hollow, yet somehow expressive. The mouths stretched wide, not smiling exactly, but frozen mid-scream. The sheriff swallowed hard. "Get the parents," he muttered. His deputy hesitated. "Sir, you really want them to see this?" Harlow didn't answer. He didn't have to. The whole town already knew. By noon, the pumpkins had been moved to the sheriff's office, 5 of them, sitting silently in a row under the buzzing fluorescent light. Reporters had started to arrive from neighboring towns, drawn by the whispers of missing children and strange discoveries. But no one could explain the smell. It wasn't the sweet rot of pumpkin flesh. It was metallic, sharp, like blood on rusted metal. When the sheriff's secretary leaned closer, she gasped and stumbled backward. Inside the mouth of one of the pumpkins, deep in the carved cavity, something glistened. A tooth. Small. Human. By evening, Elder Creek had turned into a ghost town. Porch lights stayed off. Curtains were drawn tight. Parents held their children close and spoke in hushed voices. No one went near the fields. No one went near the old Holloway farmhouse, because that's where the first pumpkins had appeared. The Holloway place had been abandoned since '87, the same year the last batch of children vanished. The windows were blacked out with decades of dust. The door hung crooked, its paint stripped away by wind and rain. But that night, something was different. A faint orange glow flickered behind the windows. Around 10 p.m., Mrs. Lambert, the same woman who'd found the strange jack-o'-lantern on her porch, saw movement out by her garden. At first she thought it was her cat. Then she saw it wasn't moving like a cat. It was slower, heavier. Something hunched low in the fog, dragging itself between the hedges. Its outline looked almost human, except for the head. The head was too round, too large. She leaned against the window, eyes wide, breath fogging the glass. The shape paused, then turned its head toward her. In the faint light, she saw the jagged smile of a pumpkin. The thing was wearing it. By midnight, the screams began. They came from the houses closest to the old farm, then from the ones farther down the road. Each time they started sharp, a shout, a cry, then cut off as if swallowed by the fog. The sheriff and his deputy raced through the streets, their flashlights slicing through the mist. Something moved in the corner of Harlow's eye, a flicker of orange, a glint of something wet and glistening. He swung the beam toward it. There, in the middle of the road, stood a jack-o'-lantern. Just one. Its grin was wide and deep, its candle burning with a steady, unnatural flame. Then another appeared beside it. Then another. Within seconds, the street was lined with them, dozens of pumpkins, glowing silently, all facing the sheriff. He lifted his gun. "Who's there?" The night didn't answer. But the pumpkins did. Their flames pulsed once, in unison, like a heartbeat. Then the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound that made his skin crawl. Laughter, children's laughter. At dawn, the fog cleared again. No bodies were found, no blood, no footprints, nothing. Just pumpkins, dozens of them, each carved with faces that looked all too familiar. One of the deputies swore he recognized his niece's freckles etched into one. Another said he saw the sheriff's badge carved into another's cheek. The sheriff didn't respond. He just stared at the nearest pumpkin, its mouth twisted into a silent scream, because he knew that face. It was Sammy Brooks. That night, the townspeople gathered at the church, desperate for safety, for answers. Old Mr. Greaves, the town historian, sat in the back pew, staring at the floor. When the mayor asked what he knew, he finally looked up. His eyes were red and his hands trembled. "The pumpkins aren't decorations," he whispered. "They're graves." Chapter 3. The First Disappearance. Rain came the next evening, thin, needling rain that hissed against the windows and turned the dirt roads to black mud. The pumpkins in the sheriff's office were gone. No one had moved them. No one had seen them leave. But the faint trail of watery footprints across the linoleum told its own story, small, barefoot, and leading straight out the front door. Sheriff Harlow hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his hands shaking as he poured another cup of bitter coffee. Outside, lightning flashed over the valley, throwing the church steeple into momentary silhouette. He thought about the faces on those pumpkins, the way they looked aware, the way their carved eyes seemed to follow him even after he'd closed the door. He told himself it was exhaustion. That's what he told the others, too. But exhaustion doesn't leave tiny, muddy footprints on the floor. Across town, the Brooks house was dark except for the candle burning in the window. Linda Brooks hadn't put it there. She'd found it burning when she woke up, the flame steady and orange like the glow of a jack-o'-lantern. She sat at the kitchen table clutching Sammy's photograph. The boy in the picture was laughing, missing one front tooth, candy stains on his cheeks from last Halloween, the last real Halloween Elder Creek had ever known. Outside, thunder rolled through the valley. Then, faintly, came the sound of a child's voice. It was distant, muffled by rain, but she knew that voice. Sammy. Linda ran to the porch, calling his name. The rain soaked her nightgown, plastering it to her skin as she stepped barefoot into the mud. Sammy. No answer, just the wind moving through the corn. And then laughter, high-pitched, playful, familiar. Her flashlight beam cut through the stalks, revealing movement, small figures darting just out of sight, their shapes warped by mist and shadow. Children. She stumbled forward, heart hammering. Sammy, come home. The laughter stopped. In its place came a whisper, so soft she almost didn't hear it. It's my turn to carve now. The light flickered. For a moment she thought she saw him standing there, her little boy, pale and dripping, a pumpkin-shaped bucket dangling from one hand. Then the beam of the flashlight caught his face. His skin wasn't skin anymore. It looked like orange rind, cracked and glistening. The grin carved into his cheeks was too wide, stretching ear to ear, stitched at the corners with something dark. The flashlight fell from her hand. By the time it hit the mud, Sammy was gone. At dawn, the searchers found her on the porch, staring into nothing, lips blue from the cold. She couldn't speak, just rocked back and forth, whispering the same thing over and over. He said it was his turn. His turn. Inside the house, every mirror was cracked, and on the kitchen table someone had left a single pumpkin, small, freshly carved, still wet with dew. The face on it was smiling, and its grin looked exactly like hers. That morning, Sheriff Harlow called an emergency meeting at the church. Every adult in town showed up. Every seat was taken, every whisper sharp with fear. Old Mr. Greaves stood again, clutching a leather-bound book that looked older than the church itself. He set it down on the pulpit. The cover was etched with a symbol, a spiral surrounded by what looked like vines or roots. When he opened it, dust and the smell of rot filled the air. "This is the chronicle of Elder Creek," he said. "Our first settlers kept it. They wrote of a harvest god, a spirit of the soil. They called him the Hollow One." He turned the page with shaking hands. "Every 20 years, when the harvest is richest and the moon bleeds orange, the Hollow One wakes. He asks for what was taken from him. Children, the life of the harvest." The room erupted. Shouts, disbelief, prayers under breath. But the sheriff stayed silent. Because he'd seen the footprints, and he'd seen what was left of Linda Brooks's pumpkin. That night, the rain stopped. The air turned still, unnaturally still, like the whole valley was holding its breath. One by one, porch lights flickered back to life, though no one turned them on. The bulbs glowed faint orange, and if you looked closely, the filaments inside seemed to twist like roots. At the end of Main Street, a new pumpkin appeared. It was larger than the rest, nearly the size of a child. Carved into it was a face that looked more human than any before. Detailed eyes, real teeth embedded where candlelight flickered through. When the clock struck midnight, that pumpkin smiled wider. And from somewhere deep beneath Elder Creek, a low rumble rolled through the ground, like the sound of the earth itself waking up. Chapter 4. Elder Creek's Curse. The storm passed, but the quiet that followed was worse. No birds, no wind, not even the crickets dared to sing. Elder Creek had gone completely still, as if the valley itself was waiting for something to happen. Sheriff Harlow stood outside the church long after everyone else had gone home. The fog lay low against the ground, thick and unmoving, coiling around his boots like smoke. He couldn't shake the feeling that the town was being watched, not from above, but from below. Inside the church, old Mr. Greaves stayed behind, hunched over the book he'd brought, the Chronicle of Elder Creek. Its pages were brittle and yellowed, written in a language older than English, full of drawings that didn't look quite human. One sketch showed a figure, tall, thin, its head round and hollow, like a withered pumpkin. From its body grew thick black roots, twisting down into the ground like veins. Underneath, written in faded ink, "He rises when the harvest bleeds." Greaves traced the words with his finger. He knew what it meant. He'd known for years. The story of Elder Creek's curse began long before the town itself. In the 1800s, this land had belonged to the Miskatah, a small farming tribe who worshipped the spirit of the harvest. They believed every autumn the soil demanded balance. One life returned for every season of growth. When settlers came, they took the land by force. They plowed over the sacred ground, burned the totems, and built their farms where the sacrifices had once been made. And then the crops grew faster than anyone had ever seen. Pumpkins the size of barrels, corn taller than houses, wheat that shone gold in the moonlight. It was a miracle harvest. But miracles always cost something. The first winter, children began to disappear. Only at night, always near the fields. The settlers blamed wolves until they found the pumpkins. Each one carved, glowing, and grinning. Inside, they didn't find pulp. They found bones. The townsfolk buried what they found. They stopped planting pumpkins. And every year they prayed that whatever lived beneath Elder Creek had gone back to sleep. For nearly a century it worked, until 1903. That year, a group of children from the church choir vanished the night before Halloween. The searchers found only their shoes, lined neatly at the edge of the cornfield, and rows of tiny pumpkins still warm to the touch. The next morning, Reverend Lyle, the preacher at the time, wrote in his journal, "The hollow one walks again. The earth will not rest until it has its due." Sheriff Harlow ran his hand over the page. The ink was smeared, but the fear in the writing was clear. He turned to Greaves. "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" Greaves stared down at his hands. "Because it doesn't matter. You can't stop something that's already been fed." The sheriff frowned. "Fed?" Greaves nodded slowly. "Every missing child, every life taken, it feeds the hollow one. He grows beneath the soil, waiting, listening." He closed the book with a trembling hand. "And now, after 20 years, he's hungry again." That night, the fog rolled in thicker than ever. The moon rose over Elder Creek, a perfect, swollen orange. The fields seemed to breathe. If you stood still enough, you could hear it, a slow, deep pulse, like the sound of a heart beating beneath the ground. In the brook's backyard, the grass had begun to die in a perfect circle, as if something massive was buried just below the surface. Mrs. Lambert, who lived next door, said she saw the soil moving. as if it were breathing. She told herself it was imagination, until she heard the knocking. 3 slow knocks on her back door. She froze. Then came the voice. Soft, childlike. Trick or treat. Her blood went cold. She stepped forward and pulled the curtain aside. A small shadow stood outside, just the outline of a child holding a pumpkin. The candle inside the pumpkin burned bright orange, and its face was smiling. Too wide, too sharp. When the light flickered, the thing holding it smiled too, and its mouth was carved from flesh. By morning, Mrs. Lambert was gone. All that remained was her nightgown, soaked in mud and pumpkin pulp, lying on the porch steps, and beside it, a new jack-o'-lantern, still warm, still dripping. The face carved into it wasn't random this time. It was hers. Sheriff Harlow ordered everyone to stay inside. He and 2 deputies took the book from the church and drove toward the old Holloway farm, the center of everything, the place where the curse had started. As they reached the gates, the fog swallowed the car. The headlights barely cut through it, glowing against something that looked like smoke but moved like water. The road ahead was gone. In its place, rows upon rows of pumpkins stretching as far as the light could reach. Each one carved, each one grinning, each one whispering. It sounded like 1,000 children breathing in unison. Then came the voice. Not human, not even close. It crawled through the air, deep and resonant, like roots shifting beneath the ground. The harvest is late. The sheriff froze. His gun felt useless. The ground beneath the car began to heave. Slow, deliberate movements, like something enormous was pushing upward from the soil. And from the darkness ahead, 2 lights appeared. Not headlights. Eyes, round, hollow, burning with orange fire. Chapter 5. The Jack-o'-lantern's Watch. The fog did not leave Elder Creek when morning came. It only changed shape, rising from the fields in slow, ghostly tendrils, curling around fences and porches, swallowing the town 1 house at a time. People began whispering about the pumpkins. At first, they thought it was a cruel prank, a Halloween trick gone too far. But by the second day, every street in Elder Creek had one. Each porch, each mailbox, each lonely fence post, perfectly carved pumpkins, grinning, watching, their faces slick with morning dew that looked disturbingly like sweat. No one had seen who placed them there. No one wanted to touch them either, because each one seemed to change. When the sun rose, the faces looked almost normal, the kind a child might carve, round eyes and clumsy smiles. But by dusk they shifted. The smiles stretched too wide, the eyes hollowed deeper, and some even looked angry, as if the flesh of the pumpkin had been pulled from the inside. It was as though the pumpkins were alive and watching. Sheriff Harlow didn't sleep that night. He sat by his office window, listening to the distant hum that had started somewhere near the fields. A low vibration, faint but steady, like something massive humming just beneath the soil. Every few minutes the sound pulsed, and he swore he saw the streetlights flicker in rhythm with it. The town generator was fine. He'd checked it twice. Whatever it wasn't mechanical. At 2:13 a.m., the phone rang. It was Tommy Greaves, the grandson of old Mr. Greaves, who lived just down from the church. His voice trembled so badly that at first Harlow thought he was injured. "Sheriff, they're moving." "What's moving, son?" "The pumpkins. Outside my window. They're turning. I swear to God they're turning to look at me." By the time Harlow reached the Greaves house, the fog was so thick it looked solid. His flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead, revealing dozens of pumpkins on the front lawn, arranged in a perfect circle around the house, all facing inward. Their faces glowed faintly, even though no candles burned inside them. It was as if they produced their own light, soft and pulsing, like breath. Harlow took a step forward and froze. The nearest pumpkin's grin twisted slowly, reshaping itself as he watched, until it looked almost human, a cruel smirk, sharp and wet, as if carved from flesh rather than rind. Behind him, Tommy screamed. The sheriff spun around and saw the boy standing in the upstairs window, pointing outside, his face white with terror. "It's in the field!" he shouted. The fog shifted, and there, just beyond the fence line, something enormous stood watching. It was tall, impossibly tall, and for a moment Harlow thought it might be a scarecrow, some cruel shape of wood and rags. But then it moved, slowly, gracefully, its limbs stretched too long, dragging against the ground, bending like roots. And where its head should have been, there was only a hollow pumpkin, carved into a jagged grin that burned with a light so bright it painted the fog in fire. The Hollow One. The name hissed in Harlow's mind like a memory not his own. He raised his revolver, but his hand was shaking. Something deep inside him whispered that it wouldn't matter, that this thing wasn't made of flesh, wasn't something a bullet could stop. It was older than the town, older than language, older than the guilt buried beneath Elder Creek's soil. The creature didn't attack. It simply turned its head, slow and deliberate, and stared. And as it did, every pumpkin on the Greaves lawn turned too, all at once, their grins twisting into perfect mimicry of the Hollow One's own. When the sheriff fired, the sound barely carried. The fog swallowed it whole. The creature didn't flinch. It only tilted its head, and somewhere in the dark behind it, hundreds of whispers rose like wind through dead grass. Trick or treat, trick or treat. The sound grew louder until it filled the night, coming from every direction, from the ground, from the rooftops, from the mouths of the pumpkins themselves. And then, silence. The Hollow One was gone. But in its place, right where it had stood, was a single pumpkin, fresh, perfectly round, and still slick with dirt. Harlow approached it slowly, every instinct in his body screaming to leave it alone. But he had to know. He lifted it. It was warm. Too warm, and it pulsed gently in his hands. When he turned it over, he saw a name carved into the bottom. A name he recognized, Tommy Greaves. By morning, the Greaves house was empty. No sign of struggle, no footprints, no blood. Only one more jack-o'-lantern on the porch, grinning wider than the rest. That day, the townspeople began to leave Elder Creek. Families packed their cars and drove toward the highway, refusing to look back, refusing to even say the word Halloween. But some stayed. Some believed the sheriff's warnings were just stories, that fear had twisted the town's imagination. They lit their pumpkins that night anyway, and when the flames flickered in those hollow faces, for just a moment, the carved mouths moved, whispering softly in voices that sounded like children. The harvest isn't over yet. Chapter 6, The Harvest Moon.
The sun never fully rose over Elder Creek that morning. It tried. Faint streaks of dull light bleeding through a gray sky. But the fog was heavier than ever, thicker, darker, almost alive, as if the air itself was rotting. Every breath carried the smell of wet earth and decay, of pumpkins long past ripe. By noon, the town square was nearly deserted. Storefronts stood with their windows covered in newspaper. Houses had curtains drawn tight, and even the birds had abandoned the trees. The only sound was the soft, steady humming that came from the fields, a deep, vibrating tone that made the glass tremble and the ground quiver underfoot. Some said it was the wind. Others swore it was him. The Hollow One. Sheriff Harlow hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat alone in his office, the Chronicle of Elder Creek open on the desk beside a single flickering lantern. The words on the page blurred together, ancient warnings written by trembling hands. When the harvest moon returns, the soil shall open, the roots shall awaken, and the Hollow One shall walk among the living once more. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, smearing patterns on the glass that almost looked like faces, hollow-eyed, smiling faces. He thought of Tommy Greaves, of the way the pumpkins whispered his name, of how the earth seemed to breathe. Something inside him knew that whatever was happening to Elder Creek was not the beginning. It was the end. At dusk, the church bell rang once, then twice, then 3 times. No one was ringing it. The sound rolled through the fog like thunder, echoing off the empty streets, shaking dust from rooftops, and making the pumpkins on every porch tremble with each strike. And then, for the first time in a century, the moon rose over Elder Creek, massive, swollen, and red. A harvest moon. Its light poured through the fog like blood through water, tinting everything in shades of crimson. The pumpkins began to glow brighter, their carved faces illuminated from within, not by candlelight, but by something deeper, something ancient. And slowly, impossibly, they began to move. It started with the ones in the town square. They rolled, one by one, in perfect unison, forming a circle as if drawn by an invisible hand. Then came the sound, a low, wet, tearing noise, like roots breaking through soil. From beneath each pumpkin, black tendrils burst forth, vines thick as rope, slick and pulsing with orange light. They dug into the ground, twitching, spreading outward, searching for something, or someone. Harlow watched from his office window as the street began to ripple, the pavement cracking under the pressure of something growing beneath it. He stumbled outside, heart pounding, revolver shaking in his grip. And that's when he saw it. The ground split open across Main Street, a jagged wound stretching from one end of town to the other. From within that wound rose a mass of writhing roots, slick with mud, and at its center, the Hollow One. He emerged slowly, towering over the rooftops, his limbs made of wood and bone, his chest hollow and glowing with orange fire. His pumpkin head turned, and the carved grin widened, not painted, not carved, but growing, as if the face itself were alive. Each time the grin stretched wider, the pumpkins across town lit up in answer, until Elder Creek itself burned with 1,000 sickly orange eyes, and the whispers began again. Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat. They came from everywhere, from the pumpkins, from the fog, from beneath the soil, a chorus of small innocent voices singing a song of death. Harlow stumbled backward, covering his ears, but the voices only grew louder. The air vibrated with their chant, and when he looked down, he realized the ground wasn't just shaking. It was moving. Hands, small, pale, dirt-covered hands, reached up from the cracks in the street. Dozens of them, then hundreds. The missing children. Their faces emerged next, hollow and still, eyes black as the soil they had been buried in, mouths opening in perfect unison as they whispered the same words again and again. He's hungry. The sheriff fired into the mass, shouting for them to stop, to go back, to rest. But the bullets vanished into the fog as though the air had swallowed them whole. The Hollow One took another step forward, and with each movement, the earth groaned, trees bent, and every window in town shattered inward. The pumpkins lining the streets cracked open, spilling thick black sap that ran through the gutters like blood. And in that liquid reflection, Harlow saw them, faces of every person who had ever vanished from Elder Creek, floating, screaming silently, their mouths filled with roots. He turned and ran. The fog chased him, curling like fingers around his coat, whispering names in his ears, names of the dead, names of those yet to die. When he reached the edge of town, he saw the old sign, "Welcome to Elder Creek. where the harvest never ends. It was half buried now, roots coiled around it like veins, pulsing with light. Behind him, the town was vanishing, swallowed whole by fog and soil, sinking inch by inch into the earth as though the ground was reclaiming it. The last thing he saw before the darkness took it all was the Hollow One's face rising above the trees, its grin stretching wider, its eyes burning like two dying suns. And then, silence. When dawn came, there was no Elder Creek, no houses, no streets, only a barren field of withered pumpkins stretching for miles, each one carved with a face, some smiling, some screaming.
And if you walk there on Halloween night under the blood-red harvest moon and listen closely,
You can still hear the whisper carried on the wind, soft, sweet, and childlike.
trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat. Chapter 7, The Field That Breathes. A year had passed since Elder Creek vanished. No one spoke its name anymore. The maps had been changed, the records sealed, and the government called it a sinkhole disaster, a natural tragedy that swallowed the entire town overnight. But those who had lived near the border of the valley knew better. They said they could still see lights on foggy nights, far out where the earth had split. Small orange flickers, too steady to be fire, too alive to be reflection. And sometimes, if you drove down the old county road, windows rolled down, the wind carried something faint. Children laughing in the distance, followed by 3 soft knocks against the car door, like something asking to be let in. Most people stayed away. But curiosity always finds a way back to the places that should remain forgotten. The team arrived on the night before Halloween. 4 of them. Lara Quinn, the journalist who'd made her name exposing small-town cover-ups and supernatural hoaxes. Her partner, Michael Crow, photographer, skeptic, and self-proclaimed ghost hunter. And behind them, 2 locals, brothers named Dean and Marcus Fenn, who'd grown up near the Elder Creek woods and swore they'd seen the lights. The valley looked empty at first, nothing but miles of gray soil, dried grass, and dead trees that leaned like broken ribs around the edge of a wound. But as the fog thickened and the last of the daylight drained away, the air began to change. The ground pulsed, not visibly, but subtly enough to feel beneath their boots, like the faint, steady rhythm of something buried deep beneath the surface. Lara knelt and pressed her hand to the dirt. It was warm, too warm, and the smell, that unmistakable scent of rot and iron, rose with every gust of wind. Michael snapped photos, his camera clicking like distant gunfire. When he checked the screen, his expression shifted. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Lara asked. "The lights," he said, voice unsteady. "In the shot. Behind you." She turned. Nothing but fog. But when she zoomed in on the photo, she saw it, a faint orange glow between the trees. Perfectly round, perfectly shaped. A pumpkin. By midnight, they'd set up camp on the edge of what used to be Main Street. Michael wired thermal cameras around the perimeter, while Dean and Marcus unpacked sound equipment. Lara sat near the fire, flipping through an old file she'd found in the state archives, a copy of Sheriff Harlow's final report. The words were smeared, most of them unreadable, but near the bottom was one clear line, written in shaky handwriting. "If the soil breathes, run." She frowned, reading it again, mouthing the words to herself. "If the soil breathes, run." The wind picked up, scattering ash from the fire, and for a moment she thought she heard something. A soft exhale, like someone breathing close to her ear. She turned sharply, flashlight in hand. No one there, only the firelight flickering across the field. And in that light the dirt rose and fell, slow and steady, as if the ground itself was drawing breath. The recording devices began to pick up static, then whispers. Marcus leaned over the monitor, adjusting dials, his face tightening. "It's picking up voices," he said. "Low frequency under the noise floor." "From where?" "Everywhere." Lara listened through the headset. At first, it was only distortion, wind maybe, or static interference. But then, beneath it, a voice, faint, childlike, humming a song she almost recognized. "Trick or treat, trick or treat." The words bled into her ears like syrup. "Michael," she said softly, "kill the recorder." But he wasn't listening. He was standing at the edge of the field, camera raised, staring into the fog. "There's something moving out there," he whispered. The fog parted. Dozens of shapes stood in the distance, barely visible, small, stooped figures holding glowing orbs in their hands. Children. Their faces were gray, their eyes hollow, and each one carried a jack-o'-lantern burning with that same steady orange fire. Michael took a step forward. "Hey!" Lara grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't. They're kids," he said. "They need—" "They're not kids, Michael." Because now she could see what he couldn't. The way their legs didn't move when they stepped forward, the way their hands melted into the pumpkins as though the vines were part of them. They weren't holding the pumpkins. The pumpkins were holding them. Dean shouted from behind. The equipment was shorting out, lights flashing, the air thick with static so heavy it felt like it was crawling under their skin. The ground trembled. Not the soft pulse from before. This was violent, rhythmic, and deliberate, like the footsteps of something colossal moving beneath them. The fog glowed orange, and then the field, that empty, barren field, began to breathe. The soil rose and fell in slow, enormous movements, and with each breath came a low groan that sounded almost human, almost alive. The pumpkins swayed in time with it, their carved faces stretching, cracking, reshaping into grotesque smiles. The air stank of rot and sweetness, the smell of something growing too fast, too strong, too wrong. Michael raised his camera one last time. When the flash went off, it lit the field for just a second. One brilliant, frozen image burned into their eyes. Thousands of pumpkins, all of them carved, all of them watching. And in the center, a massive shape rising from the soil, a body of roots and bone, head glowing like fire, its grin wide enough to split the sky. The hollow one had come back. The flash faded. The fog swallowed the light. When Lara turned, Michael was gone. His camera lay on the ground, still warm, its lens cracked, the last photo still visible on the display. A blurred image of his own face, eyes wide, mouth open, and behind him, something tall and grinning with a pumpkin head pressed against his shoulder. The brothers ran first, vanishing into the fog, their screams fading fast. Lara stumbled after them, the ground slick and pulsing under her boots, whispering her name in 1,000 small voices. She didn't stop until she reached the tree line. When she turned back, the field was glowing, thousands of orange lights spreading like wildfire through the mist. And at the center of it all, the hollow one stood tall, its head tilted back, breathing in. And for just a moment she swore she saw faces in the fog, not ghosts, not illusions, but the town of Elder Creek, whole again, every street, every house, every soul, frozen in that final breath before the harvest began. They say Lara Quinn never made it back. Her car was found 3 miles from the valley, engine running, headlights on, passenger door open. The only thing inside was her recorder, still playing. If you listen closely to the end of that tape, you'll hear her voice, trembling, whispering the same words that Sheriff Harlow once wrote long ago. "If the soil breathes, run." Then silence, and finally, faintly, almost tenderly, Trick or Treat. Chapter 8. The Return of the Hollow One. It started quietly. A whisper carried on the autumn wind, a story no one wanted to believe. A missing journalist, a camera found near the old valley, recordings that no one could finish listening to, not because of what they contained, but because of what came after. Those who played the tape said that once you heard her voice, once you heard her whisper those final words, "If the soil breathes, run," you started hearing the same thing in your own house at night. The soft sound of earth shifting beneath your floorboards, the faint hum under your bed, and sometimes, if you listened too long, you'd hear breathing. By early November, the news had reached 3 towns north of Elder Creek: Hallows Point, Gray Bend, and Miller's Hollow. People began finding pumpkins on their doorsteps. They thought it was a prank, some Halloween leftover joke. But there was something wrong with these pumpkins. They were fresh, too fresh. Their stems still damp, as if they'd just been pulled from the ground moments ago. And every single one was carved. The faces weren't random this time. Each one looked like someone from the town, a teacher, a child, a mailman. And when those people looked closer, when they realized it was their own faces carved into the orange flesh, they disappeared within the week. In Gray Bend, Sheriff Madison called in 2 deputies to collect the pumpkins for evidence. They brought them to the station, set them on the table in the evidence room, and locked the door. By morning, the pumpkins had moved. They weren't on the table anymore. They were lined neatly against the wall, facing the door, grinning. And when the sheriff cut one open, expecting to find candle wax or maybe a prank device inside, he found something else. Flesh. Real flesh. Soft and warm, pulsing like muscle tissue, and inside that, buried deep in the pulp, a small, beating heart. The sheriff dropped the knife and stepped back, his stomach turning as he realized the rhythm of the heartbeat wasn't random. It matched something deeper, something moving beneath the floor, something alive. That night, Gray Bend's main streetlights went out one by one. The air turned cold, and through the mist came a sound that no one had heard since Elder Creek vanished, the soft, rhythmic chant of children. Trick or treat, trick or treat. The fog thickened, and from within it, figures began to appear. Dozens of them, small silhouettes with glowing faces. The children of Elder Creek had come home. In the morning, Gray Bend was empty, every house abandoned, every street silent. The only thing left behind were the pumpkins, hundreds of them, lining the sidewalks, the rooftops, even the church steps, each one grinning, each one burning with that same orange light. The newspaper called it the Second Harvest. But no one printed the story twice. The editors vanished before the next issue could run. By the time the panic reached Miller's Hollow, people were already fleeing the state. Roads out of the valley were clogged with cars, headlights cutting through fog so thick it looked solid. But the fog was alive. It followed them. It moved with purpose. Drivers reported seeing children standing on the roadside at midnight, holding pumpkins that glowed faintly in the mist. When they slowed down, the children waved. When they stopped, the children smiled. And when the fog lifted, the cars were gone. Back in the valley, the earth continued to move. The field where Elder Creek once stood now pulsed with a heartbeat that could be heard for miles. Vines spread outward through the soil, creeping under roads, crawling up power poles, wrapping around street signs like skeletal fingers. Satellite images showed the pattern clearly. A growing shape burned into the land itself. A face, the Hollow One's face. They say the last transmission ever received from that region came from a highway patrol unit out near Route 19. The recording lasted exactly 37 seconds, static at first, then a voice, frantic, breathless. "There's pumpkins on the road. Hundreds of them, blocking everything. A pause. Wait. Number. They're moving. Another pause. Oh God, they're... And then the sound of something tearing, something wet, followed by a child's voice whispering softly, almost lovingly, into the radio. The harvest never ends. Now, a year later, the region remains under quarantine. No flights, no visitors. The fog still hangs there, permanent, unbroken, like a living scar across the earth. Sometimes truckers driving the long highway at night say they can see it from miles away. A faint, glowing orange shimmer under the clouds, and if you roll down your window, you can hear it. A heartbeat, slow, steady, waiting. They call it the breathing field now. But the old folks, the ones who remember the real name, the ones who whisper stories of Sheriff Harlow, of Tommy Greaves, of Lara Quinn, they still call it by what it truly is, Elder Creek. And every Halloween they light a candle and whisper a warning into the dark. If the soil breathes, run. Chapter 10. The Final Harvest. The ground shook as if the world itself was breathing. The sound came from everywhere at once, from the road, the fog, the trees, and from deep inside the earth where Elder Creek had once been alive. It wasn't thunder. It was a pulse, slow, steady, ancient. The Hollow One loomed above them, its body a grotesque tapestry of vines, roots, and human remains. Pumpkin faces flickered like dying lanterns across its chest, each one crying soundlessly behind a veil of orange flesh. The air stank of decay and wet soil. Conrad's flashlight cut through the fog for only a second before it died. Ruth screamed behind him. She was running, stumbling, half mad from the sight of it. Evelyn didn't run. She stood still, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the shifting light inside the creature's chest. Because there, behind the layers of vines, she could see him. Her father, Sheriff Harlow. His face was half buried in pulp, his eyes open but empty, his mouth moving silently in a prayer he'd never finished. "Dad," she whispered, "it's me. Please." The Hollow One tilted its head, creaking like old wood under strain. Its voice came not from a mouth, but from the soil itself, vibrating the ground beneath her knees. "He's part of me now." The words weren't spoken, they were grown. They crawled through the fog, heavy and wet, clinging to her ears like rot. Conrad grabbed Evelyn's arm again, shaking her violently. "Move! We have to move now!" But she didn't hear him. She only heard the whisper of her father's voice beneath the Hollow One's. A softer sound, a plea. "Burn it, Eve! Burn it!" They ran. The fog followed. Every step they took was swallowed by the sound of vines cracking open, roots slamming against the asphalt like fists. Ruth's scream was cut short. Conrad turned back just long enough to see her lifted into the air, wrapped in vines, her body pressed against the Hollow One's chest until her face melted into the mass of glowing flesh. Her eyes blinked once, and then she was gone. The creature roared, a sound like wind through 1,000 hollow pumpkins, and the mist turned red. Evelyn stumbled, falling to her knees near the remains of a street sign that once read, "Welcome to Elder Creek." She dug into her bag, pulling out the old lighter she'd brought, her father's. Its engraved brass was tarnished and blackened, but it still sparked. "You can't burn the earth," Conrad shouted, panting, his face streaked with ash and mud. "It's alive. It'll just—" She looked at him, wild-eyed. "That's the point." She lit the flame. The fire burned weak at first, sputtering against the damp wind. But then the soil hissed, like it recognized the heat. And in that moment she knew it could feel pain. The Hollow One screamed. The sound was 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. Children, mothers, fathers, all howling through carved mouths. The pumpkins around them began to ignite one by one, bursting in sprays of molten pulp. The roots writhed violently, tearing up chunks of road and gravel, thrashing like serpents. Conrad was thrown backward, his radio crushed beneath a falling tree. Evelyn stood her ground, clutching the lighter in one hand and her recorder in the other, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Dad." She threw the lighter into the soil. Fire exploded outward, crawling through the cracks in the ground, racing along the roots like veins igniting from within. The hollow one convulsed, its glowing chest collapsing inward as flames consumed the vines. For a moment it looked almost human, a figure on fire, arms reaching out toward her, and she thought she saw her father again, smiling. Then the valley screamed one last time, and everything went white. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the world was silent. No fog, no heartbeat, just ashes. She stood in the ruins of Elder Creek, surrounded by blackened earth and charred pumpkins that no longer glowed. Conrad was gone. The road behind her had crumbled away, leading nowhere. Her recorder was cracked, still clutched in her trembling hand. She pressed play. Static. Then, a faint whisper. "Eve, you did good, sweetheart." She fell to her knees, sobbing into the dirt that had once held her father's bones. And then she heard it. Very faint, very distant. The sound she had dreaded most. A heartbeat. Slow, steady, deep beneath the ashes. The ground moved, just slightly, enough to make the dust tremble. And through the smoke, the faintest glow returned. A single half-buried pumpkin, flickering softly in the dirt, its face carved into a smile. The wind rose, carrying whispers through the hollow remains of Elder Creek. If you listen closely, they say you can still hear it. Children laughing. A soft chant, trick or treat. And beneath it, one last voice. Calm, broken, proud. Leave the light on. Then silence. Forever. The end of the night of Elder Creek.